Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Graphs with Mr. Molden for AP Macro. Today we're going to be looking at the loanable funds market. The loanable funds market is the market for borrowers and savers. So if you borrow money or you save money, you impact this graph. Alright, real quickly, some general information on this graph. Loanable funds is the market in which banks, those that give loans, are the suppliers, and those that demand loans, households, businesses, the government, or the rest of the world, these four categories, demand loans. Now, we can also, these four groups, contribute to the supply that banks have by saving money. Here you have the loanable funds graph. You have real interest rates, right, and the quantity of loanable funds, right. The price on the loanable funds market is the real interest rates because we're talking loans, and banks are interested in making a profit, and so they need to set their interest rate in terms of nominal interest rate minus inflation. And so to adjust for inflation, we use real interest rates. That way they can make sure they're making money over the long run. And quantity is the quantity of loanable funds because that's the market that we're looking at. Now, you will recognize that this looks very similar to just a basic supply and demand graph. All right. And that is because at demanders of loans, at high interest rates, it costs us money to borrow funds, that is the real interest rate. And so at higher interest rates, we don't want to borrow as much, and at lower interest rates, we are more willing to borrow because the price is going down, just like any other market. All right? And like any other market, these banks are profit-seeking entities, and so when interest rates are low, they're not making as much money per loan. They don't supply as many, and as interest rates climb, they are more willing to supply loans at each and every market. Now, demanders of banks of loans are those that want to borrow money for different items, and we'll look at some examples in a minute. But again, those groups include households, businesses, the government, the rest of the world. All right, the supplier of loans. All right, this is all through the banking system. Okay, so anytime you save money, banks have the ability to loan that money out, all right, minus required reserves, all right. And again, so if anybody that saves money will impact the supply of loan. Who is that? Well, again, it's households, businesses, the government, and the rest of the world. Let's look at some examples of how they do this. Let's look at each category here. Households. When households save money, it's simply called saving money. All right, and again, savings will impact the supply of loanable funds. All right, when households demand more loanable funds, it is known as borrowing. All right, we have to borrow money to make certain purchases. All right, borrowing. All right, so for example, say, Snow White here needs to buy a new jet because what princess doesn't need, a new jet? She would have to borrow money from the bank to do so. So that would increase the demand for loanable funds. All right. Next, we have businesses. All right. When businesses save money, it is known as retained earnings. All right, they are taking their profits and saving them. All right, when businesses demand more loans, it is known as capital investment. They are taking out loans and increasing investment into their company. And this can be the building of new machinery, building of new factories. All right, and that will impact demand. All right, the government. All right. The government, yes, can save money. It is known as a surplus. All right? And it does happen from time to time. And every now and then, the government will also demand loans to pay off its deficit. All right? All right. A deficit is when the government spends more than it takes in taxes. And a surplus is when they take in more than they spend. All right? So, another quick example. Here we have Batgirl, the queen of Nerdtopia, she is announcing that her government for the 14th straight year is in government surplus. They have extra money, all right? And so they would increase the supply of loanable funds due to that surplus of funds. Now, surpluses aren't always a good thing, and we'll talk about that in a different graph. All right, the rest of the world. All right, they can impact supply in two ways, both positive and negative, just like all these others can. When it is a positive, it is called capital inflow. There is more money coming in. All right, and when it is a negative impact, it is known as capital outflow. They are taking money out of our system and sending it to somewhere else. All right, and foreigners can also borrow money from our banks as well, and that would impact demand of the loanable funds market. Real quickly again, on the graph, you have R for real interest rates. Quantity of loanable funds are your price and quantity. You have supply, which is impacted by savings, and you have demand, which is impacted by borrowing. And where they intersect, we'll set the real interest rate and quantity of loanable funds. And just like on any supply and demand market, a change in demand or change in supply would adjust both the real interest rate and quantity of loanable funds. And there are all your items that can impact both the supply and demand from the four actors on the loanable funds market.